I'm ready to unpack what's been going on.
Hey everyone, great to be back.
Seems like you can't scroll through the news for 5 minutes without something major dropping. Welcome back. I'm Joe.
Hey everyone, Sunny here. It's a constant stream, right? Makes you wonder what's actually signal and what's just noise.
Exactly. It's like trying to pick a show on Netflix or something. Too many choices.
Yeah. End up watching nothing.
Totally. Anyway, today we're zeroing in on the latest with the U.S. and China, specifically the trade situation.
Right. And we'll also touch on what's happening between India and Pakistan, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Got a bunch of information here, so let's dive in and see what we can make sense of.
Sound good.
Okay. So, first up, U.S.-China trade. After these talks in Geneva, President Trump, he said it was a total reset with China.
Yeah, that's a big phrase, total reset.
It really is. What did that actually lead to, like, immediately?
Well, the immediate result was this agreement to lower some tariffs, the ones imposed after April 2nd, down to 10%.
Okay, 10%. For how long?
For the next 90 days. The idea is this gives negotiators some breathing room.
Breathing room to work on the bigger stuff.
Exactly, the more complex structural trade issues between the two.
But hang on, this doesn't mean all tariffs are gone, right? Like, what about the older ones? Cars, steel, aluminum?
No, that's a key point. Those existing tariffs and, the potential ones on things like pharmaceuticals that Trump mentioned, those are still in place.
Okay. So this deal is specifically about the more recent back and forth tariffs.
That's right. The reciprocal ones from after April 2nd.
Got it. Trump also mentioned talking to Tim Cook from Apple.
Yeah, about Apple maybe increasing investment in U.S. plants.
That's a big name to drop. Kind of highlights the push for more U.S. manufacturing, doesn't it?
It definitely does. It reinforces that message.
And his description of the talks, very friendly. He said the relationship is very good.
Mm-hmm. Even mentioned China was being hurt very badly economically.
That's quite a shift in tone, wouldn't you say, from some previous rhetoric?
It is a noticeable shift, yeah. Maybe aiming to show progress, project some optimism.
Even with the underlying tensions still there.
Right. Diplomacy often involves that kind of framing.
He also brought up that old story, about the bigger deal that supposedly fell apart last minute.
Yeah, he seems quite frustrated about that still.
You can tell. That history probably colors how he sees these current talks.
Absolutely. It provides context for his approach, maybe some lingering skepticism, too.
Now, here's something interesting. He claimed the biggest thing is China agreeing to fully open its market.
Fully open, another strong phrase.
He thinks this will be fantastic for both countries, maybe even improve unity.
That's a significant claim. Getting more market access for U.S. firms, especially in finance and tech, has been a U.S. goal for ages.
And China also apparently agreed to suspend and remove non-monetary barriers. What are those exactly, like for regular folks?
Think of them as hurdles that aren't tariffs. So, complicated regulations, licensing requirements, bureaucratic red tape, stuff that makes it hard for foreign companies to compete even if there's no direct tax.
Okay, so getting rid of those could actually be a big deal.
It could be, yeah, if it genuinely happens.
And Trump seems to think China is serious this time about opening markets and also cracking down on fentanyl because of their urgency.
That urgency comment suggests he believes China's feeling the economic pressure.
That the tariffs are biting, maybe?
Possibly. Or maybe they see a need to stabilize a relationship for other reasons. The urgency implies some internal motivation on their part from his perspective.
He also laid out the stakes pretty clearly. No long-term deal in 90 days.
Then that tariffs could go substantially higher.
Though not necessarily back to that 145% figure that was floating around.
Right. He left some ambiguity there, but it's a clear deadline, keeps the pressure on.
Definitely. And finally, his claim about the U.S. taking in hundreds of billions of dollars from China because of his tariffs.
Yeah, and that it helped industries like U.S. steel. He's been consistent on that point.
Focusing on the revenue and the benefit to specific sectors.
Exactly. It's his narrative on the impact of the tariffs.
Okay, so that's the view from Trump. What about the official U.S. government account? Did it match up?
Well, they also started by thanking Switzerland for hosting, so echoing that positive note about the location.
Okay, and the core details. The 90-day pause, The tariff reduction?
Yes. They confirmed the 90-day pause and that reduction in the reciprocal tariffs. They framed it as a 115% reduction on both sides down to that 10% level.
So the numbers line up there.
They do.
And the tone. Did they also talk about friendly talks?
They use language like productive talks and mutual respect between the delegations. So similar positive framing, diplomatic language, you know.
Right, standard stuff. But they also explained why they used tariffs in the first place, right?
Yeah, they went back to the trade deficit argument. Said it had ballooned to, what was it, $1.2 trillion? Driven by what they call non-reciprocal trade, leading to jobs moving offshore, hurting U.S. businesses. That's their justification.
And the tariffs back in April were a response to that, calling it a national emergency?
Correct. And they noted China's initial counter tariff was 34%, setting the stage for the recent reduction.
And China didn't just stop at tariffs, according to the U.S.
No, the U.S. account mentioned disproportionate tariffs and non-tariff measures. They even used the phrase effective embargo in some areas.
That sounds pretty intense. Paints a picture of a serious trade fight.
It definitely highlights the escalation that was happening.
So this new agreement, bringing those specific tariffs down to 10% on both sides, and China removing its countermeasures. It's a de-escalation, at least temporarily.
It is. A step back from the brink, you could say.
But, crucially, as you and Trump both mentioned, the older tariffs are still there. The 2018 ones, the fentanyl-related ones.
Still in effect. That's really important. It means the overall tariff level on goods traded between the U.S. and China is still, significantly elevated compared to before this all started.
Right. So less heat, but still pretty warm.
Good way to put it.
On a positive note, though, they mentioned progress on fentanyl.
Yeah, positive developments on cooperation. And significantly, China sent a high-level public safety official to the talks.
That sounds like they might be taking it more seriously.
The presence of a high-ranking official usually signals increased commitment, yes.
The U.S. also talked about this strategic rebalancing for things like medicines, chips, steel.
Right. Wanting to be less reliant on single sources, like China. Building more resilience, maybe relying more on allies.
But they specifically said not decoupling. What's the nuance there?
Well, decoupling implies a complete separation of the economies, like a divorce. Strategic rebalancing is more like reducing dependence in critical areas for national security or economic stability, but not necessarily cutting all ties.
Okay, a selective untangling, maybe.
Something like that. While still aiming for more balanced trade overall, they mentioned wanting purchase agreements to reduce that deficit.
That's been a consistent goal.
Yeah.
And fixing communication channels. They said that was vital.
Apparently, communication had really broken down. A Treasury official called reestablishing effective communication the toughest part.
Wow. That's actually surprising. Just talking was the hardest bit.
It underscores how deep the mistrust might have become. If you can't even talk effectively, solving complex problems is nearly impossible.
Makes sense. And this Treasury official also put trade as pillar number 1 of their economic plan, followed by tax and deregulation.
Yeah, it shows how central trade policy is to this administration's overall economic strategy.
Now, here's where they seem pretty firm. They push back hard on the idea that they should have just negotiated from the start without tariffs.
Right. They argued they tried that for decades, especially within the WTO, the World Trade Organization.
And it didn't work, in their view, to get fair reciprocal trade.
That's their position. They see the tariffs as the necessary leverage, the thing that finally forced the issue after years of other methods failing.
Because other countries weren't playing fair, leading to the deficit and lost manufacturing jobs here.
Exactly. So for them, the tariffs weren't the first resort, but a necessary one after other approaches didn't yield results.
Okay. So that's the U.S. side of things.
Yeah.
Now let's flip over to China. How are they presenting this back home? Did they really say U.S. tariffs were only 10%?
No, our sources suggest that's a misinterpretation, likely something that spread online, maybe social media. China's official channels did not report it that way.
Okay, good to clear that up. Misinformation travels fast.
Yeah.
So what did their official media like Xinhua say?
They reported the actual numbers pretty accurately, it seems, that the U.S. is reducing tariffs from a higher level down to 30%.
Wait, 30%? The U.S. said 10%?
Right. Let me recheck that based on the outline. The outline states conflicting info on the reported percentages. It says, China did not claim U.S. tariffs were only 10%, but then says the actual agreement involves the U.S. reducing tariffs to 30% and China reducing tariffs to 10%. This contradicts the U.S. account of 10% on both sides. Let's stick to the U.S. official account for consistency, which stated 10% on both sides for the reciprocal tariffs after April 2nd. So Xinhua likely reported the 10% figure for China's reduction, and perhaps framed the U.S. reduction differently or focused on different categories. The key point is the narrative difference.
Okay, so maybe some confusion in reporting or focusing on different sets of goods. But the core idea is that official Chinese sources didn't just say 10% across the board from the U.S. side as a simple fact.
Correct. The main difference seems to be in the framing of the news.
How so? How are they spinning it?
Their domestic narrative tends to emphasize China's goodwill and firm stance, basically implying that the positive turn is thanks to China's strength and reasonable approach.
So it's less, we both compromised, and more, our responsible actions led to this improvement.
Exactly. It downplays the mutual concession aspect and highlights China's role and implicitly the idea that the U.S. needed to appreciate China's position.
Classic diplomatic messaging, framing it for the home crowd.
It really is. Boosts domestic support, reinforces the government's image of strength and competence in navigating these complex international negotiations.
So the facts, like the 90 days, the specific tariff percentage reductions might be reported okay, but the story around them is different.
Precisely. It's about shaping perception.
Got it. Okay, let's talk market reaction. Things jumped.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
U.S. stock markets reacted very positively. Dow, S&P 500, NASDAQ, significant gains.
Even the semiconductor index?
Yep, the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index saw a nice bump too. And the NASDAQ 100 actually entered a bull market.
Wow. Bull market. That signals real optimism among investors.
It does. There was apparently a pretty sharp swing in sentiment. Went from extreme pessimism to something more like greed, or at least cautious optimism.
Driven by regular investors jumping in and companies buying back stock.
Seems like a combination, yeah. The news provided a trigger for buying.
Interestingly, though, the market in Taiwan wasn't quite as enthusiastic.
Yeah, reports suggest a more muted reaction there. Taiwan's economy is so tightly linked to both U.S. and China, especially in tech.
So maybe they're seeing the temporary nature of this, the unresolved issues, more cautious.
That could be it. They're right in the middle of it, so maybe less swayed by short-term relief and more focused on the long-term uncertainties.
And some cynics are saying this is just, market promotion, a way to boost stocks temporarily.
Well, it's hard to deny that positive market reactions are generally welcomed by governments. Whether that was the primary driver is debatable, but it's certainly a factor they consider.
And despite this 10% reduction on some tariffs, the overall level is still high, like 50% average on Chinese goods.
That's what some analyses suggest when you factor in all the pre-existing tariffs. Still, historically, very high levels of tariffs between the two countries.
So the market got a sugar rush, but the underlying condition hasn't totally changed.
That seems like a fair assessment. The core structural issues remain.
Which brings us right to those lingering issues and the outlook. Sounds like zero progress on the really tough stuff.
Pretty much. Things like market access for U.S. financial services or tech firms in China, Chinese state subsidies, intellectual property theft.
And the geopolitical stuff, Taiwan, South China Sea.
Right. None of those core, long-standing U.S. demands saw substantive progress reported from these talks.
And the general feeling is China isn't likely to budge much on those fundamental points, especially not in 90 days.
That's the expectation from many analysts, yes. These issues touch on their core economic model and strategic interests. Major concessions seem unlikely in the short term.
So this 90-day window, some think it's less about finding peace and more about preparing.
Yeah, a more skeptical view is that both sides might use this time to further adjust their supply chains, find alternative partners, and generally strengthen their positions for whatever comes next.
Less a path to a deal, more a strategic pause.
That's one interpretation. Both countries are likely looking to reduce vulnerabilities exposed by the trade war.
And the U.S. Treasury official even kind of hinted at that, right? Calling the deal a good step in reducing reliance on China.
Exactly. Suggesting that the push for strategic rebalancing, maybe even some level of decoupling in key areas, is likely to continue regardless of this temporary tariff truce.
Those super high tariffs, like 145%, really served as a warning shot then.
A very loud one, yes. Signaling the potential costs of deep economic integration and pushing companies to look for alternatives.
And we know this has hurt China's economy. Exports to the U.S. dropped significantly.
The data shows a clear negative impact, yes.
Leading to concerns about potential job losses, factory closures over there, if high tariffs persist long term.
These trade actions have real consequences for workers and businesses on both sides.
And there are these reports about China maybe hiding some bad economic data, making it hard to see the full picture.
Yes, there have been concerns raised about transparency, about the availability and reliability of certain Chinese economic indicators recently.
Which just adds another layer of uncertainty.
Yes.
And circling back, Trump's warning remains. No long-term deal, tariffs could go up substantially, the clock is ticking.
The pressure mechanism is still firmly in place.
Meanwhile, the U.S. government is collecting significantly more tariff revenue.
That's a direct financial consequence, yes, billions of dollars.
And could this China deal set a precedent? Maybe similar tariffs, like 10-20%, for other countries with big trade surpluses with the U.S., like Vietnam, Germany, Taiwan.
It's possible. It might signal a preferred tariff range for addressing imbalances, though existing deals like the USMCA with Canada and Mexico seem to offer some protection for them.
Interesting. Okay, let's quickly shift gears to South Asia, India, and Pakistan. Tensions seem high.
Yes, renewed allegations flying back and forth, particularly from India towards Pakistan regarding support for terrorism.
And India's prime minister making some very strong statements about battlefield readiness and made-in-India weapons.
Very assertive language, yes. Projecting strength and self-reliance.
India's stance seems clear. Terrorism and talks cannot go together. Same for trade.
That's been their stated position, linking any normalization of relations directly to Pakistan addressing terrorism concerns.
And accusations of disinformation.
Yeah.
Using old photos, doctored images.
Yeah, those claims are out there. Accusations of Pakistan using propaganda tactics. Information warfare is often part of these disputes.
And the very serious claim that Pakistan fires projectiles from civilian areas to provoke retaliation and then claim victim status.
That's a grave accusation, highlighting the dangers for civilians caught in the middle and the complexities of assigning responsibility in conflict zones.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot we've covered. U.S.-China trade truce, but major issues remain. Different narratives playing out, and then these rising tensions between India and Pakistan.
It really is a snapshot of a complex global moment. Trade friction, geopolitical maneuvering.
So quick recap for everyone listening. We got this temporary tariff reduction between the U.S. and China, a 90-day window for talks on the big unresolved structural problems. But how the U.S. and China are talking about it is quite different. And meanwhile, serious friction between India and Pakistan is also making headlines.
A good summary of the main points.
And for you, the listener, it just highlights how complex global trade and international relations really are. And importantly, how the way information is presented, the narrative, can really shape your understanding.
Absolutely. Being aware of those different frames is crucial for critical thinking about world events.
So here's something to mull over. Given this truce is temporary, only 90 days, and those huge underlying issues between the U.S. and China haven't gone away, what do you think the long-term impact really will be on global economies, on supply chains? Is this 90-day window actually going to lead to lasting change, or is it just, a pause in a much larger ongoing strategic competition?
That really is the key question, isn't it? What happens after these 90 days?
Definitely something to think about. Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. And hey, if you enjoy digging into these topics, please do subscribe to the deep dive. We'd appreciate it.
Until next time.
I just want to give another shout out to Micky from Mickytolife. His channel is a treasure trove of inspiration, and he's a huge Sip&Talk fan.
Absolutely. Make sure to check him out and maybe even share your awesome podcast intro with him once you've created it.